Hello, peaceful soul. I'm your storyteller this evening, here to help you unwind and drift into a gentle, restful sleep. Before we begin our journey, remember to like the video and subscribe for more calming bedtime tales. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. And if there's a story you'd love to hear next, I'd be happy to bring it to life. My name is Sarah Jenkins. I used to be the go-to babysitter in our neighborhood, starting when I was just 14. For almost 5 years, I spent countless nights in other people's homes, putting kids to bed, watching TV, and making sure everything was safe. It was easy money, and I always thought I was good at it. I'd seen everything from temper tantrums to sick kids, but I never once felt truly scared. Most people think babysitting is a simple job, just making sure kids don't burn the house down. But it's more than that. You're in charge of someone else's world, in their personal space, and sometimes you see things that were never meant for your eyes. Here is what keeps me checking locks 3 times every night, even now, years later. This one night, I was babysitting for the Millers. Their house was big, kind of old, with lots of dark wood. It was tucked away at the end of a long, tree-lined driveway. The air always felt a little heavier there, a bit cooler, even in summer. The Miller kids, Emily and Tom, were sweet. Emily was 8, Tom was 5. They loved movie nights and building blanket forts. This particular Friday, Mrs. Miller had laid out all their favorite snacks, and Mr. Miller reminded me that the alarm system was set, even though they were only going to a dinner party nearby. They left around 7, and the house fell quiet, just the hum of the refrigerator and the gentle murmur of the TV. Emily and Tom were asleep by 9 o'clock. I checked on them, pulled their blankets up, and then settled on the couch to watch a late-night movie. The house was calm, almost too calm. It was a still kind of quiet, the kind where you could hear the blood rushing in your ears. I remember thinking it felt like the house was holding its breath. Then I heard it, a soft tap, tap, tap coming from upstairs. It was faint, like fingernails gently drumming on glass. I paused my movie. My first thought was Emily. Maybe she got up for water or couldn't sleep, but the tapping stopped. I waited a moment, then started the movie again, telling myself it was just the house settling, or a branch against a window. Old houses make noises, right? That's what I tried to believe. A few minutes later, the tapping started again, this time louder, more distinct. It wasn't a window. It sounded like it was coming from inside Emily's room. My stomach tightened. I knew the kids were heavy sleepers. I turned off the TV, the sudden silence making the tapping even clearer. It was rhythmic now, a slow, steady tap, tap, tap. My heart started beating faster. This was not the normal creaking of an old house. This was different. I slowly walked to the bottom of the stairs, my hand gripping the cold wooden banister. The tapping continued. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong. Every hair on my arms stood on end. I made my way up the stairs, each step sounding like a thunderclap in the silent house. The tapping grew louder with every step. When I reached Emily's door, the sound was undeniable. It was coming from inside her room. I took a deep breath, my hand trembling as I reached for the doorknob. It was cold. I pushed the door open slowly, just a crack. The room was dark, lit only by the faint glow of the streetlights filtering through the curtains. I could see Emily's bed, a lump under the covers, but the tapping wasn't coming from there. It was coming from the closet door, which was slightly ajar. My heart hammered against my ribs. I knew for a fact I had closed that closet door earlier when I checked on her. I pushed the door open wider, my eyes trying to adjust to the dim light. The tapping stopped. The room was utterly silent again, but this time it was a heavy, suffocating silence. "Emily?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. No answer. I peered into the closet. It was dark, full of clothes and toys. Then I saw it. A small hand, pale and thin, pressed against the inside of the closet door, just where the tapping had been. But it wasn't Emily's hand. Emily's nails were usually bitten short. This hand had long, sharp-looking nails. My blood ran cold. I gasped, stumbling backward. My mind raced. Emily was in her bed, still asleep, a small figure under the blankets. So whose hand was that? I couldn't breathe. I stared at the closet door, expecting it to fly open, expecting something terrifying to leap out. But nothing happened. Just the darkness. My mind screamed at me to run, but my feet felt stuck to the floor. Then, a low, raspy whisper slithered out from the darkness of the closet, a sound that made every cell in my body freeze. It wasn't Emily's voice. It wasn't Tom's. It sounded like dry leaves being dragged over concrete. "You shouldn't be here." That was it. That was all it took. I didn't wait to see anything else. I turned and ran, flying down the stairs, fumbling with the alarm system by the front door, tripping over my own feet in my rush. I burst out of the house, not even bothering to lock the door behind me, and ran across the lawn, down the driveway, and didn't stop until I reached the main road. I called the Millers from my phone, hysterical, gasping out what had happened. They were home within 15 minutes, furious at first, then confused, then scared themselves when they saw my face. They went inside. They checked the kids. They checked the closet. Nothing. No one. The kids were still asleep, undisturbed. The closet was empty. The Millers tried to tell me it was my imagination, that I was overtired, but the look in their eyes told a different story. They were unnerved too. I never babysat for them again. I never babysat for anyone again after that night. The memory of that pale hand, those sharp nails, and that dry, whispering voice from the darkness of the closet still haunts me. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and my mind starts to wander, I hear a soft, rhythmic tapping. I check the locks, I pull the blankets up to my chin, and I wonder whose hand that was and what it wanted. And more importantly, what would have happened if I had just opened that closet door all the way. My name is Michael Chen. For 20 years, I worked as an overnight security guard for various businesses, from quiet office buildings to sprawling industrial parks. I'm used to the quiet hum of the night, the way sounds carry differently, and the feeling of being alone in large, empty spaces. I've seen my share of strange things, shadows that move too quickly, doors that unlock themselves, or the chilling feeling of being watched when no one else was around. Most of the time, there was a logical explanation, or I could convince myself there was. My job was to observe, to protect, to react. But sometimes there's no logical explanation, and nothing can prepare you for the things that hide just out of sight. This is the story of a sleepover that made me question everything I thought I knew about safety and friendship. It was the summer after 6th grade, and I was spending the night at my best friend David's house. David lived a few towns over, in an older neighborhood where all the houses looked a bit like castles, with stone walls and big, leafy trees. It was his grandmother's house, really, and she was away on vacation. David's parents were staying there to look after the place, but they worked late shifts, so we often had the house to ourselves for a few hours. This specific night, his parents had already left for work by the time I arrived. The house felt huge and quiet, but David and I were used to it. We had our usual plans: video games, terrible horror movies, and raiding the fridge. We played games for a couple of hours, the sounds of our laughing and the game filling the living room. Then we decided to watch a movie. As the sun went down, a chill seemed to settle over the house, even though it was a warm summer evening outside. David's house always felt cooler than anywhere else, like the old stone walls held onto the winter air. There was a faint, musty smell, like old books and damp earth. As the movie started, I noticed a strange, repeating scratch, scratch, scratch sound coming from upstairs. It wasn't loud, just a subtle, persistent noise that barely cut through the movie's soundtrack. I glanced at David, but he seemed engrossed in the film. I figured it was probably a tree branch scraping against the roof or a window. The house was old after all, and noises were common. The scratching continued, a low, unsettling rhythm that I couldn't ignore. It started to feel less like a branch and more like something inside the house. I kept trying to focus on the movie, but my eyes kept darting toward the ceiling. David finally paused the movie. "You hear that?" he whispered, his eyes wide. He had heard it too. My stomach dropped. It wasn't my imagination. Now that the movie was paused, the scratching was much clearer, and it seemed to be coming from the master bedroom directly above us. It wasn't just scratching anymore. It had a sort of dragging sound to it, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. David's parents had told us to stay downstairs and not go into their room. It was locked too, but the sound was getting louder and it was hard to ignore. It sounded like furniture was being moved, but slowly, awkwardly. We both stood up, our hearts pounding. "Maybe it's a cat?" David offered, his voice sounding unsure. His grandmother didn't have a cat or any pets. Our eyes locked. The dragging sound stopped. Then we heard a thud, like something heavy had been dropped. And after that, a soft, deliberate footstep, just one, coming from the room above us. Then another footstep, and another. Slow, heavy footsteps. They weren't like human footsteps. They were too slow, too heavy, with a strange dragging sound in between each one, like the person was dragging a leg. The footsteps started moving towards the stairs. We froze, staring at the ceiling, then at the staircase. My body felt numb with fear. We backed away slowly, pressing ourselves against the wall. The footsteps creaked closer to the top of the stairs, each sound a hammer blow to my chest. We could almost feel the weight of whatever was moving up there. Then a low, guttural growl vibrated through the floorboards. It was deep, raw, and utterly terrifying. It wasn't an animal sound, not a dog or a cat. It sounded like something much older, much more primal. The air in the room grew cold, biting at my skin. A sickening, sweet smell, like rotten meat and something metallic, began to fill the air. My head swam. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong, terribly wrong. We needed to get out. The growling stopped, replaced by a wet, slurping sound. Then, silence. For a moment, we just stood there, paralyzed. Then a dark, heavy shadow fell over the top of the staircase. It was huge, distorted, reaching down the wall. It wasn't the shadow of David's mom or dad. It was too broad, too hunched. We heard another footstep, louder this time, right at the top of the stairs. And then a low, wet thump as something landed on the first step. David grabbed my arm. "Run," he hissed, pulling me towards the back door. We didn't look back. We sprinted through the kitchen, threw open the door, and burst into the backyard. We didn't stop until we were over the fence and halfway down the block, gasping for air. We called David's parents from a neighbor's house, frantic and incoherent. They rushed home. They checked the house. Everything was locked. Nothing was out of place in their bedroom. No one was there. David and I swore we saw it, swore we heard it. His parents tried to rationalize it, saying it was our imagination, or the old house playing tricks. But the smell, that awful smell, still lingered in the house, faint but there. They found a single, deep scratch mark on the wooden floor upstairs near the master bedroom door. It was too clean, too deliberate to be accidental. That night changed everything. I never had another sleepover at David's house. Even now, 2 decades later, when I'm alone in the dark, a cold sweat breaks out on my skin if I hear a strange scratching sound or a footstep that sounds too heavy, too slow. I'll never forget that smell or the feeling of pure terror that night, and I'll never forget the shadow that reached down those stairs. Some things are best left unknown, especially when they hide in the darkness of an old house. My name is Emily Dawson. For 10 years, I worked as a camp counselor every summer. My job was to look after kids, lead activities, and make sure everyone was safe in the woods. I've spent countless nights in old cabins, heard all kinds of strange noises from the forest, and even seen a few things that made me wonder if the old camp ghost stories were true. You learn to be tough, to rationalize odd sounds as animals, or shadows as just branches in the moonlight. But what I saw that night wasn't a campfire ghost story. It was something real, something that followed me home. It was my friend Chloe's 13th birthday, and she was having a sleepover. Her house was really old, built in the 1920s, and it sat on a hill just at the edge of town, right where the paved road turned into a dirt path leading to thick woods. Everyone said her house had a vibe. It wasn't scary in a spooky way, just quiet. Even when we were all talking and laughing, there was this underlying stillness, like the house was always listening. Chloe, Lily, Ben, and I were all squeezed into her living room, eating pizza and watching a bad horror movie. The wind outside picked up, rattling the old windows, but we just pulled our blankets tighter and kept laughing. Around midnight, after the movie finished, Chloe's parents went to bed, telling us to keep the noise down. We ended up in Chloe's bedroom upstairs, huddled on the floor with blankets and pillows. We were telling ghost stories, our voices getting softer with each tale. It was the kind of night where every creak of the house seemed louder, every shadow deeper. That's when I first heard it. A faint, distant singing. It sounded like a child's lullaby, very soft, very far away. My first thought was that a neighbor had their window open, or maybe Chloe's little sister, who was staying at her aunt's for the night, had left a music box playing downstairs. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was nothing important. But the singing didn't stop. It wasn't coming from outside the house. It was too muffled for that and too close. It sounded like it was coming from under us, from the space between the floorboards and the ground below. The tune was simple, but off-key, kind of warped, like the singer was struggling to remember the notes. I glanced at Chloe. Her eyes were wide. Lily and Ben had stopped talking too. "Did you guys hear that?" Lily whispered, pulling her blanket tighter around her. So, it wasn't just me. My stomach twisted into a knot. This wasn't a neighbor's radio, and it definitely wasn't a music box. It was a human voice, struggling. The singing started getting louder, and it was no longer just from under the floor. Now it sounded like it was coming from inside the walls, moving slowly, deliberately around Chloe's bedroom. The lullaby became clearer, but even more unsettling. It was a familiar children's tune, but sung in a way that made my skin crawl. Drawn-out notes, pauses in the wrong places, and a strange, breathy quality to the voice. It sounded like a child, but not quite right. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong, deeply wrong. The air in the room grew heavy and cold, even though the summer night was warm. Then, the singing stopped directly outside Chloe's bedroom door. The sudden silence was worse than the sound. We all held our breath, our eyes glued to the door. We could hear the soft scuff of something moving on the other side. A slow, gentle scratching sound started, like fingernails dragging across wood, coming from the base of the door. Then, we heard a quiet, wet sniff, as if someone was breathing right under the door crack. We could see the faint outline of a shadow under the door. It wasn't a normal shadow. It was too low, too broad, not like a person standing upright. We were all frozen, huddled together, barely breathing. My heart hammered against my ribs, so loud I was sure everyone else could hear it. The scratching stopped. The sniffing stopped. And then, slowly, agonizingly slowly, the doorknob began to turn. It wasn't turning with a jerk, like someone was trying to force it. It was turning smoothly, quietly, as if a small, careful hand was turning it. We saw the doorknob rotate, click, and then the door began to open, just a fraction of an inch, revealing a sliver of inky darkness. A low, guttural moan, thin and weak, escaped from the crack in the door. It wasn't a human moan. It was something else. It was full of sorrow and something like hunger. We scrambled backwards, tripping over blankets, pressing ourselves into the farthest corner of the room. We were crying, shaking, terrified. We just watched that crack, waiting for whatever was out there to push the door open fully. But it didn't. The door just remained slightly ajar, that dark sliver of unknown staring back at us. We stayed like that for what felt like hours, huddled, crying silently, staring at the slightly open door. When Chloe's parents finally came home around 4 a.m, they found us piled on top of each other, exhausted and terrified. The door was still ajar. They checked the house. Nothing. No one. They tried to tell us it was just our imagination, that we'd scared ourselves with ghost stories, but the fear was real. The singing was real. The turning doorknob was real. I never had another sleepover at Chloe's house. To this day, when I hear a strange, off-key sound or a distant melody that seems to come from nowhere, I get a cold shiver down my spine. I avoid old houses now, especially ones that are too quiet. And when I'm alone at night, I always make sure to check under my door, just in case something is sniffing on the other side, waiting for me to open it. My name is Marcus Thorne. For 30 years, I worked as a librarian, spending my days surrounded by books, stories, and the quiet whispers of forgotten history. I've worked in ancient libraries filled with dust and secrets, and modern ones with sleek, silent computers. My job was to organize knowledge, to help people find information, and sometimes to uncover hidden truths in old documents. I always believed that everything could be explained, that there was a logical reason for every mystery. This wasn't a story I read in a book. This was a story that tried to write itself into my life during a sleepover that went terribly wrong. It was the winter break of our freshman year of high school. My friend Alex had just moved into a brand new house on the edge of town. It was one of those big, modern houses with huge windows and a 2-car garage. But it was built on a property that used to be an old apple orchard, and before that, even older, something no one really talked about. Alex was excited to have us over for a sleepover. Me, Chris, and Sam. We were going to play video games all night, eat endless pizza, and maybe even watch a few cheesy horror movies. It was supposed to be a normal, fun night. We had just started a new game around 8 o'clock when the lights flickered. Not just once, but several times, like the electricity was struggling. "Ugh, new houses always have weird wiring," Alex grumbled, not looking up from his controller. Chris agreed, saying his new house had similar problems. We didn't think much of it, just continued playing. The house felt warm and comfortable, filled with the sounds of our game and our chatter. Alex's little sister was at his grandma's house, so her room, which was right next to Alex's, was empty. The flickering happened again a few minutes later, more aggressively this time. The TV screen went black for a second, then came back on, and that's when I heard it. A faint, crackling static, followed by a barely audible whisper, coming from Alex's sister's empty room next door. It sounded like an old baby monitor that hadn't been turned off properly. I looked at Alex. "Is your sister's monitor on?" I asked. Alex shook his head. "Nah, we always unplug it when she's not here. Probably just interference from someone else's baby monitor. This is a new development. Lots of families." He tried to sound confident, but his voice had a slight tremor. I tried to believe him, but the whisper sounded too distinct, too close. It wasn't a general static. It had a specific quality to it, like someone struggling to speak through a bad connection. The power flickered again, harder this time, and then the whole house plunged into darkness. A soft click sound from the fuse box in the hallway, and then silence. Complete darkness. Alex quickly grabbed a flashlight from a drawer. The static and whispering from his sister's room immediately grew louder in the sudden silence, much clearer now. It wasn't just interference. It sounded like small, pained voices, and then, unmistakably, a child's whimpering cry. My stomach clenched. "The monitor's unplugged, right?" I asked, my voice thin. Alex nodded, his face pale in the flashlight beam. "Yeah, I saw my mom unplug it this morning." We all stared at the door to the empty room. The crying intensified, turning into soft, choked sobs. It sounded like a very young child, trapped and alone. An icy cold swept through our bodies, a cold that wasn't from the power being out. It was a deep, chilling cold that sank into our bones. The air around us became heavy, thick, and smelled faintly of damp earth and something sweet, like wilting flowers. My instincts were screaming at me. This was wrong. This was beyond wrong. Suddenly, the crying from the empty room turned into a guttural, terrifying scream that ripped through the quiet house. It was a scream of pure, absolute agony, and it seemed to echo from every direction. We all jumped, scrambling backward, our hearts hammering. The flashlight beam danced wildly. Then, a small wooden toy car sitting on a shelf inside Alex's sister's room flew off the shelf and clattered to the floor with a loud thwack. We heard a quiet creak, creak from the room. We aimed the flashlight, trembling at the crack under the door. And then, just as the scream faded, the empty crib in Alex's sister's room began to rock. Slowly at first, then faster, violently, back and forth, creak, 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 like a distressed parent was trying to soothe an invisible child. Then, a small, dark shadow, no bigger than a child, darted across the open doorway of the empty room, heading down the dark hallway. It was just a glimpse, but it was enough to make us all scream. We stumbled over each other, blindly trying to get away. We crashed through the living room, fumbled with the front door, and burst outside into the cold night, not caring that we were only in t-shirts and shorts. We didn't stop running until we reached the end of the street, shivering, crying, and utterly hysterical. We called Alex's parents, gasping out what had happened. They rushed home, confused and worried. By the time they arrived, the power was back on. They checked the house. Nothing was out of place. The toy car was on the floor, but they just thought it had fallen. The crib was still. The baby monitor was dead, completely broken. Alex's parents tried to tell us it was a power surge, our imaginations, too many scary movies. But we knew what we had heard. We knew what we had seen. I never spent another night at Alex's new house. I hate static now. It makes my skin crawl, and I can never shake the feeling that some places, even brand new houses, hold on to the echoes of what happened there before. Who was crying? What was screaming? And what exactly was rocking that crib in the dark? These questions still haunt me, a silent terror that reminds me that some stories don't just stay in books, they live and they wait. My name is Arthur Peterson. For 25 years, I was a firefighter in a busy city. I've seen some of the worst fires imaginable, pulled people from burning buildings and faced down true chaos. You learn to stay calm under pressure, to trust your gut, and to recognize danger before it's too late. There's a certain smell to a fire, smoke, burning wood, melted plastic, that you never forget. But sometimes the danger isn't from something you can fight with water and foam. Sometimes the danger is invisible, and it leaves a smell that no amount of fresh air can ever truly clear from your memory. This is the story of a sleepover that taught me fear wasn't always about flames. It was the summer after 8th grade. My friend, Kevin Miller, lived on an old farm about 30 minutes outside of town. His house was a rambling 2-story farmhouse built sometime in the early 1900s. It had a big porch, creaky floorboards, and a fireplace that always smelled faintly of old ashes. We loved going there because his parents let us stay up late, explore the barn, and we felt miles away from everything. This particular night, it was just Kevin, me, and our friend Daniel. Kevin's parents were out for the evening at a neighbor's house, leaving us in charge. The night was clear and still. The only sound was the distant chirping of crickets. We were in the living room, sprawled on the floor with blankets, playing board games. The air in the house was usually a mix of old wood and something earthy from the farm. But as it got later, around 10 o'clock, I started to notice something else. A faint smell, like wood smoke, but old, stale, and somehow sweet. It was very subtle at first. I sniffed the air. "Is something burning?" I asked, looking around. Kevin just shrugged. "Nah, probably just the fireplace. It always smells like that after my dad uses it. Old houses, you know?" Daniel agreed, not paying much attention. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was nothing. I was used to smelling smoke, so maybe my nose was just being extra sensitive. The night went on, but the smell kept bothering me. It was getting stronger, not like a fresh fire, but like smoke that had settled into everything, seeped into the walls. It was heavy, making it hard to breathe easily. Then I heard a faint, rasping cough coming from upstairs. It was soft, muffled, like someone trying to cough quietly into a pillow. I looked at Kevin. He paused his turn in the game. "Was that your mom?" I asked. Kevin shook his head. "Nah, they're at the neighbor's, and my little sister's at Grandma's. Daniel and I exchanged a glance. The cough was unsettling. My stomach tightened. This wasn't the sound of an old house. This was the sound of someone sick, someone struggling to breathe. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong. The coughing grew more frequent, and now we could hear soft footsteps dragging across the floorboards upstairs, specifically from what we knew was Kevin's grandmother's old bedroom. The room was usually kept locked, full of old furniture and things. It sounded like something heavy being moved or someone stumbling. Then, a distinct thump and a quiet shattering sound, like glass breaking, came from that same room. That was it. We couldn't ignore it anymore. We all stood up, our hearts pounding. The smell of old smoke was now thick, heavy, suffocating. It felt like it was pressing in on us. Kevin looked terrified. "My mom locks that room. No one goes in there," he whispered, his voice trembling. We stood at the bottom of the stairs, staring up into the darkness. The footsteps grew closer to the top of the stairs, each one heavy, dragging. The air around us became unnaturally cold, a biting cold that cut through our clothes. And then we heard it clearly, a low, choked gasp right at the top of the stairs, followed by a wet, rattling breath. It sounded like someone was dying. Suddenly, a faint, flickering orange glow appeared at the top of the staircase, just for a second. It wasn't a light bulb, it was a soft, pulsing warmth, like embers, but it had no source. In that brief light, we saw it. A dark, hunched figure standing at the top of the stairs, its back to us. It seemed to be made of smoke and shadows, but it had a clear human outline. It was very tall and seemed to be swaying. Then, a low moan, filled with pain and despair, drifted down the stairs. And as the figure slowly turned its head towards us, we saw its face, or what was left of it. It was gaunt, distorted, like it had been burned away, with two dark, hollow pits where eyes should have been. A faint, almost transparent hand reached out, claw-like, towards us. We didn't wait to see anything else. We screamed, a primal sound of pure terror, and ran. We tore through the living room, crashed into the front door, fumbled with the lock, and burst out into the night. We ran across the lawn, through the fields, and didn't stop until we reached the main road where we flagged down a passing car. We were incoherent, gasping, crying. The driver, a kind old man, took us to the neighbor's house. Kevin's parents rushed back. They checked the house. Nothing. No fire, no broken glass. The locked bedroom was still locked, untouched. Kevin's parents tried to tell us it was a nightmare or too many scary movies. But the smell, that awful, acrid smell of old smoke and something metallic, lingered in our clothes, in our hair, long after we left the house. And the image of that burned, shadowy face, those hollow eyes, still burns in my mind. I never went back to Kevin's house. To this day, the smell of smoke, even from a distant campfire, makes my stomach clench with a raw, primal fear. And I can never shake the feeling that some places, some old houses, hold on to the pain of the past, forever haunted by the echoes of what once was. What was burning? Who was coughing? And why was it still there, waiting in the darkness of an old farmhouse? My name is Clara Jensen. For 15 years, I worked as a psychiatric nurse, mostly in the overnight ward. I've heard countless stories of fear, delusion, and things that people say they've seen or experienced. My job was to help people understand their minds, to bring them back to reality, to calm their terrors. I learned to separate what was real from what was in their heads, But sometimes, what people claim to see and feel is real, even if there's no scientific explanation. And sometimes you find yourself questioning your own sanity after witnessing something that defies all logic. This is the story of a sleepover that made me question everything I thought I knew about the mind and reality. It was my freshman year of college, and I was spending the weekend at my friend Maya's apartment. It was an old place, a duplex on the second floor of a building downtown. It had high ceilings, creaky wooden floors, and a strange cold spot right in the middle of her living room, no matter how high she turned the heat. Maya had just moved in a few months ago, and she loved the character of the place. We were planning on studying, but mostly we were going to gossip and eat junk food. It was a typical Friday night. The city sounds a muffled hum outside the window. We were spread out on the living room floor, surrounded by textbooks and empty snack bags, when I first noticed something odd. The air in Maya's room, just off the living room, felt noticeably colder than the rest of the apartment. I thought maybe the window was open a crack, or it was just a draft. Maya was asleep on the couch, exhausted from a week of exams. I got up to close the window in her room, but it was already shut tight. A strange stillness hung in the air there, like sound was being swallowed. I dismissed it as just an old building being drafty, even though I couldn't find a source for the draft. Later, as I was falling asleep on the floor next to the couch, I heard Maya talking in her sleep. It wasn't her usual sleep-talking muttering. She was saying a name very clearly. "Eleanor, don't, please." Her voice was strained, almost begging. I sat up, startled. "Maya?" I whispered. She stirred, then settled back down, still muttering. "She wants me to play. Don't touch the doll." My stomach dropped. Maya didn't have a sister named Eleanor. She didn't even own a doll. The cold in her room seemed to seep into the living room, wrapping around me like a blanket. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong. This wasn't normal sleep talking. This was something deeper, something darker. I tried to wake Maya, shaking her shoulder gently, but she just mumbled and turned away. I lay back down, but I couldn't sleep. The apartment was completely silent, except for Maya's soft, disturbed breathing. Then I heard a faint, distinct click coming from Maya's bedroom. It sounded like a light switch, but there were no lights on in her room, and it happened again. Click, click. My heart pounded against my ribs. I sat up again, staring at the darkened doorway of Maya's room. The cold was unbearable now, a sharp, piercing cold that made my teeth chatter. The air also carried a faint scent of old lavender and something else, something metallic and sickly sweet, like stagnant water. Then, from the absolute darkness of Maya's bedroom, I heard a small, tinkling sound, like tiny bells or a child's wind chime. It wasn't just once, it was a rhythmic, playful jingle moving around the room. It sounded like something was dancing in there. Then, a low, childish giggle echoed from the room. It was high-pitched, almost sweet, but utterly chilling in the dark, empty apartment. And then I saw it. A small, dark shadow detach itself from the corner of Maya's room and slowly glide across the doorway, pausing, looking out at the living room. It wasn't a human shadow. It was too small, too distorted, with two glowing red pinpricks where eyes should have been. A whisper, thin and dry, slithered into the living room, right past my ear. It was a child's voice, speaking in a language I didn't understand, but the tone was playful, cruel. Then, a single, small, cold touch pressed against my cheek, like a tiny, icy finger. I screamed, a raw, terrified sound that ripped through the quiet night. I scrambled backwards, knocking over a stack of books, my eyes wide with terror, fixed on that doorway. Maya woke up with a gasp, confused and disoriented. "What? What is it?" she mumbled, rubbing her eyes. I couldn't speak. I could only point, trembling, at her bedroom door where the shadow had just been. Maya, still groggy, turned her head to look. Nothing. The room was dark and silent. "What are you talking about, Clara? There's nothing there," she said, her voice laced with annoyance. But as she spoke, a single, old-fashioned porcelain doll, one I had never seen before, rolled out from under her bed and stopped right in the middle of her doorway, its painted eyes staring blankly at us. It had an old, faded lavender dress. I never spent another night at Maya's apartment. I told her what I saw, what I felt, what I heard, but she just dismissed it as a bad dream, a scary movie playing on my mind. She said she found the doll when she moved in, a creepy old thing she just kept under her bed. But I knew better. The cold, the smell, the whispers, the touch, the shadow, the doll, it was all real. Even now, years later, I sleep with a nightlight. The sound of children's toys, especially dolls, sends a shiver down my spine. And I can never quite shake the chilling question, who was Eleanor? What did she want? And why was she trying to play with us that terrifying night? My name is Kevin Foster. For 30 years, I worked as a park ranger in some of the most remote parts of the country. My job was to protect the wilderness, guide hikers, and ensure everyone stayed safe. I've faced down bears, gotten lost in blizzards, and seen the raw power of nature. You learn to read the forest, to understand its rhythms, and to trust your instincts when something feels out of place. Most people think of the woods as peaceful, but I know better. The wilderness holds its own secrets, and some of them are not meant to be found. This is a story from a sleepover that taught me some things are best left buried in the earth, and some fears are more ancient than any tree. It was the fall of my senior year of high school. My friends, Sam, Ben, and Jake, and I decided to have a cabin sleepover in an old, run-down hunting cabin deep in the woods behind Sam's family property. It wasn't really a cabin. It was more like a shack, with no electricity or running water, just a rusty wood-burning stove and a few dusty bunks. It was far enough that Sam's parents wouldn't hear us, but close enough we could walk back in the morning. The air was crisp, smelling of pine needles and damp earth. We thought we were being adventurous, tough guys camping out. We brought sleeping bags, flashlights, a stack of comic books, and enough junk food to feed an army. The plan was to tell ghost stories, play cards, and generally just hang out, away from adult supervision. Around 9 o'clock, after we'd eaten all the pizza and were trying to get a fire going in the stove, I noticed how quiet it was. Not just regular woods quiet, but too quiet. The crickets had stopped. The wind had died down. It felt like the entire forest was holding its breath, the kind of stillness you feel just before a storm hits, but there were no clouds in the sky. I looked out the cabin's grimy window, trying to see if anything was out there. Nothing, just the dark, silent trees. I shrugged it off, thinking maybe the cold had just made the animals quiet. Sam was still messing with the fire, so I figured it was just my imagination making a simple, quiet feel eerie. But the unnatural silence continued. And then, a few minutes later, I saw something. A faint, reddish glow, deep in the woods, maybe a quarter mile away. It wasn't like a campfire or car headlights. It was a soft, pulsing light, like a low ember that seemed to appear and disappear. I pointed it out to the others. Sam and Ben saw it too. their eyes widening. Jake, ever the skeptic, said it was probably just a hunter's flashlight or a faraway house light, reflecting off something. But there were no houses that far out, and hunters didn't use soft, pulsing red lights. The glow vanished entirely. Then we heard it, a faint, rhythmic thumping, coming from the direction of where the light had been. It was like a very slow, heavy drum beat, echoing through the silent woods. My stomach clenched. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong. This wasn't a hunter. This wasn't an animal. This was something else. The thumping grew louder, slowly, steadily, getting closer to the cabin. It wasn't random. It had a purpose, a relentless rhythm. We stopped trying to light the fire. We huddled together, listening. The temperature inside the cabin seemed to drop sharply, a biting cold that made our breath visible. The smell of pine and damp earth was replaced by something else, something cloying and sweet, like rotting leaves mixed with old blood. We could hear the distinct sound of branches snapping under heavy footsteps, moving towards the cabin, matching the rhythm of the thumping. We were no longer alone. We pressed ourselves against the wall, listening, terrified. The thumping was right outside now, a deep, resonating thump, thump, thump that vibrated through the cabin floor. Then a low, guttural chanting began, a string of words in a language none of us recognized. It was deep, raw, and full of a chilling, ancient power. The chanting came from directly outside the cabin, from all sides, like multiple voices speaking at once, low and menacing. Then a sharp scrape against the wooden wall, just outside the window, like something with claws was dragging itself up the side of the cabin. We screamed, scrambling away from the window, tripping over each other. The chanting grew louder, more frantic. The thumping became faster, more aggressive. Then a loud thud against the door, rattling the entire frame, like something heavy had been thrown against it. We heard a sickening crack, like old wood splintering. And then, through the thin, grimy window, we saw it. A face. It was huge, pale, and distorted, like something that had been stretched and pulled, with wide black eyes and a gaping, toothless mouth that was twisted into a silent shriek. It pressed itself against the glass, its skin a sickly white, its head covered in strange, coarse hair that looked like dried moss. It wasn't human. It wasn't an animal. It was something from a nightmare, something ancient and hungry. We piled onto the top bunk, shaking, crying, pulling blankets over our heads, praying it would go away. The cabin shook. The door splintered. We could hear the guttural chanting right outside the door, the thumping against the walls, the scraping at the window. It felt like the entire forest was alive and trying to get in. We heard the old door groan and then a loud crack as the latch finally gave way. We squeezed our eyes shut, waiting for something to burst in to grab us. But nothing happened. The noises slowly faded. The chanting grew distant. The thumping stopped. We stayed under those blankets until dawn, too terrified to move. When the first rays of sunlight finally peeked through the trees, we cautiously opened our eyes. The cabin was silent. The door was hanging open, splintered at the latch. There were deep claw marks on the window frame, and on the dusty floor, right inside the doorway, was a single, smooth black stone, perfectly round with a faint, reddish sheen. We grabbed our things and ran, not stopping until we were out of those woods and back at Sam's house. We never talked about it again, not really. We tried to rationalize it, to say it was just the wind, or animals, or our overactive imaginations. But we all knew what we had seen and heard. I never went back to that cabin. To this day, the smell of rotting leaves and the sound of a slow, rhythmic thumping in the distance makes my blood run cold. And I always make sure I sleep with my windows closed and my doors locked tight. I learned that night that some things are not just legends. Some things live in the deepest parts of the wilderness, and they remember, and they wait for you to visit. My name is Daniel Hayes. For 10 years, I worked as a commercial fisherman, spending most of my life on the ocean, battling storms and bringing in catches. I know the sea in a way most people don't. Its moods, its dangers, its endless mysteries. I've seen strange lights on the horizon, heard phantom ships, and felt the power of something vast and unknown beneath the waves. You learn to respect the ocean, to never turn your back on it, and to trust your gut when it tells you something is deeply wrong. But what I experienced that night wasn't a sea legend. It was a horrifying encounter that blurred the lines between reality and nightmare, leaving me with a fear of the deep that still chills me to my core. It was a cold, foggy November night, and I was having a sleepover at my friend Leo's house. Leo lived with his grandparents in a small, isolated fishing village, in a house perched right on the edge of the cliffs overlooking the churning gray sea. The house was old, built entirely of stone, and smelled permanently of salt and damp. The windows rattled even in a light breeze. It was the kind of place where the line between land and sea felt thin, almost permeable. My other friend, Chris, was also there. Leo's grandparents were visiting relatives in the next town, leaving us in charge. We were planning on playing cards, telling ghost stories, and maybe even sneaking down to the old pier if the fog wasn't too thick. As the evening wore on, a thick, white fog rolled in from the sea, swallowing the village whole. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. The air became heavy, damp, and tasted strongly of salt. We were playing cards in the living room, listening to the mournful bleating of the foghorn from the distant lighthouse. Then I heard it. A faint, low groaning sound, coming from the water below the cliffs. It wasn't the sound of waves or a ship's horn. It was a deep, resonant sound, like a giant, mournful sigh or something huge rubbing against the rocks. I paused my game. "Did you guys hear that?" I asked. Leo, always used to the sounds of the sea, just shrugged. Probably just the tide changing or a rock moving around in the surf. Happens all the time. Chris seemed to agree, so I tried to dismiss it, telling myself Leo knew what he was talking about. But the groaning kept coming, slowly, steadily, and it felt like it was getting closer, moving from the open water directly towards the cliffs below the house. It was deep and guttural, a sound that seemed to vibrate in my chest. Then the rhythmic thump, thump, thump of something heavy hitting the wooden pier down below. It was loud enough to make us all stop our game and stare at each other, our eyes wide. This wasn't the tide. This wasn't rocks. The air in the house grew heavy, damp, and unnaturally cold, carrying a faint, fishy smell, but not like fresh fish, like something ancient and long dead mixed with something sharp and metallic. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong. This was a sound of something big, something alive that shouldn't be here. We all stood up, our hearts pounding. The thumping against the pier grew more frantic, more desperate. It sounded like something was trying to climb onto the pier, struggling with its own immense weight. The groaning from the water intensified, turning into a low, mournful wail. Then we heard a series of loud, wet splashes from below, followed by a heavy, dragging sound on the pier itself. It sounded like something huge and slimy was pulling itself out of the water. The house was built on solid rock, but we could feel faint vibrations through the floorboards. Then, from just outside the living room window, we heard a slow, deliberate scrape, scrape, scrape against the stone wall of the house, moving upwards, slowly, steadily. It was directly outside, just below the window ledge. We held our breath, our eyes glued to the window, which was opaque with fog. The groaning sound was right outside the window now, a wet, rasping breath mixed with a gurgling sound. The temperature plummeted even further, turning the air into an icy cloud. We could almost feel the presence of whatever was out there pressing against the house. Suddenly, a loud, wet thwack hit the window pane right in front of us. Something huge and dark slammed against the glass, leaving a thick greenish slime streaking down the pane. We screamed, stumbling backward, knocking over chairs and falling over each other. The slime was thick and foul-smelling, like rotten seaweed and something unidentifiable. We could hear the sound of heavy, dragging limbs moving against the wall, and then a series of rapid, desperate taps on the window, like long, clawed fingers trying to get a grip. Then, through the fog and the slime on the window, we saw it. A single, enormous, lidless eye staring directly in at us. It was a murky, yellow-green color with a dark, slit pupil, and it seemed to glow with a dull, malevolent light. It was surrounded by thick, barnacle-encrusted skin, and it blinked slowly, deliberately. The creature let out a low, guttural moan that vibrated through the glass, through the walls, through our very bones. It was a sound of immense age and cold hunger. We didn't wait to see the rest of the creature. We ran, screaming, crashing through the kitchen, fumbling with the back door, and burst out into the dense fog, tripping and falling. We ran blindly, away from the cliffs, away from the house, away from the ocean, until we collapsed, gasping for air, in the middle of the village square. We were incoherent, hysterical. A concerned neighbor found us and called Leo's grandparents, who rushed home. They checked the house. Nothing. No slime on the window, no eye. The pier was undisturbed. Just the fog and the sound of the foghorn. Leo's grandparents tried to tell us it was a shared nightmare, the fog playing tricks on our minds, or too many ghost stories. But the smell of that ancient, fishy decay lingered on our clothes for days, and the image of that monstrous yellow-green eye, staring with such cold hunger, is burned into my memory. I never had another sleepover at Leo's house, and I never sailed those waters again. To this day, the sight of heavy fog rolling in from the sea makes me sick with dread, and the thought of what lies hidden in the deep, what ancient things might surface in the darkness, still haunts my waking hours. Some things belong in the ocean, and some things are better left unseen, because once you've seen them, they never truly leave you. My name is Ethan Campbell. For almost 18 years, I was an archivist in a historical museum, dealing with old documents, forgotten artifacts, and sometimes the dark stories they held. I've cataloged items from ancient battlefields and dusty crypts, and learned that history often has a chilling echo. My job was to preserve the past, but sometimes the past doesn't want to stay quiet. This is the story of a sleepover where I learned that some objects hold more than just memories. It was the summer after my junior year of high school. My best friend, Noah, was having a sleepover. His parents were out of town and his older sister was watching us. Noah lived in an old Victorian house with high ceilings and lots of dark wood. His family collected antiques, so the house was full of strange, old things. We were playing video games in the living room surrounded by dusty cabinets and velvet chairs. The air always felt thick in Noah's house, a mix of old wood and something faintly metallic, like old coins. Around 10 o'clock, we were setting up for a horror movie when I noticed a strange, faint ticking sound coming from the dining room. It wasn't a clock. It was too fast, too irregular, like tiny gears grinding. I glanced at Noah, but he was busy with the DVD player. "You hear that?" I asked. Noah just mumbled, "Hear what?" "Probably just the house settling." I tried to ignore it, telling myself old houses make all sorts of sounds, but the ticking grew louder and more frantic. It sounded like it was coming from a particular antique cabinet in the dining room, filled with porcelain dolls and old trinkets. The air around the cabinet grew heavy, cold, and smelled faintly of dust and something sweet, like old potpourri. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong. This wasn't just a settling house. Suddenly, the cabinet door slowly, silently swung open on its own. We froze, staring. The ticking stopped. Then, from the darkness inside the cabinet, we heard a soft, rhythmic humming, like a lullaby but sung in a low, distorted voice. And then, one of the porcelain dolls, an old-fashioned one with cracked paint, slowly tilted its head to the side, its painted eyes fixing on us. Noah screamed. We scrambled backward, tripping over each other. The humming intensified, becoming a mournful wail. The doll's head kept tilting until it was at an impossible angle. Its mouth, a painted red line, slowly stretched into a wide, dark grin. Then, a single, small, porcelain hand detached from the doll and slowly lifted, pointing a cracked finger directly at us. We burst out of the house, not even bothering to grab our shoes. We ran down the street screaming until Noah's sister, awakened by the noise, found us. She tried to calm us, but we were hysterical. She went back inside. Nothing was out of place. The cabinet was closed. The doll was sitting perfectly still, its head straight. She said we had just scared ourselves. But I never went back to Noah's house. To this day, the sight of old dolls or the faint scent of potpourri makes my heart race. And I can never shake the chilling image of that doll, its head twisted, its hand pointing. What was in that doll, and what did it want to do with us? My name is Olivia Morgan. For 15 years, I've been a night shift nurse in a pediatric hospital. I've seen a lot of suffering, a lot of bravery, and a lot of quiet moments when the world feels still. My job is to bring comfort and care, to banish fears with a steady hand. But sometimes, even in a place of healing, terror can find its way in. This is the story of a sleepover that taught me some fears are universal, even to the smallest among us, and some presences are not just imagined. It was my younger cousin Lily's 6th birthday, and she was having her first sleepover at our grandmother's house. My grandmother's house was warm and comforting, full of old quilts and the smell of freshly baked cookies. My other cousin, Sophie, and I were helping her get ready, setting up blankets and pillows in the living room. It was supposed to be a night of giggles and fairy tales. Around 10 o'clock, after Lily and Sophie were asleep, Grandma went to bed. I was reading a book when I heard it, a faint, soft whisper coming from the hallway just outside the living room. It sounded like 2 children talking, but too quiet, too breathless. My first thought was that Lily and Sophie had woken up and were whispering, but their soft breathing was still rhythmic from the pile of blankets. I thought maybe it was the old house creaking, but the whispering grew slightly louder, and it was definitely children's voices. They sounded distressed, speaking in quick, hushed tones. The air in the living room grew cold, chilling my bare arms. Then I heard a soft, rhythmic tap, 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 coming from the old rocking chair in the corner of the living room. My stomach clenched. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong. This wasn't the house settling. I looked at the rocking chair. It was slowly, gently rocking back and forth on its own. And then, from the darkest corner of the room, near the rocking chair, I saw two small glowing eyes appear. They were dim, but unmistakably red, staring directly at Lily and Sophie. The whispering from the hallway intensified, turning into a desperate plea, like children begging. I gasped, frozen in fear. The rocking chair suddenly began to rock violently, back and forth, creak, creak, creak. The two red eyes slowly began to rise, getting taller, closer to the sleeping girls. A low, guttural growl, thin and raspy, came from the shadows. Then, a dark, spindly hand, with long, sharp fingers, reached out from the darkness towards Lily. I screamed, a raw, primal sound. I leapt up, grabbing Lily and Sophie, pulling them into my arms, rushing towards the light switch. I flipped it on, flooding the room with light. The rocking chair stopped. The red eyes vanished. The growl stopped. The room was empty. My grandmother rushed downstairs, worried. She found me crying, holding the terrified girls. She checked the room, the hallway. Nothing, just an empty room. She hugged us, telling us it was just a bad dream, a trick of the shadows. But I knew what I saw. I never forgot the red eyes, the growl, or the desperate whispering. Even now, when I'm on night duty and a room feels too cold, or I hear a sound that isn't quite right, I check every corner, every shadow. I can never shake the feeling that some things follow the most innocent among us. Some sleepovers aren't just about fun and games. Some places are cheap because the previous guests never lived to leave bad reviews. Some communications are not meant to be heard by individual minds, but by entire species. And some invitations should never, ever be accepted. My name is Chloe Vance. For over 12 years, I've been a foster parent for troubled teens. My job is to provide a safe, stable home, to listen, and to help kids navigate difficult times. I've heard a lot of hard stories, seen trauma, and learned that some fears run deeper than any argument or past mistake. Most people think teenagers are too old for sleepover fears, but that's where they're wrong. When kids are vulnerable, sometimes things slip through the cracks. This is a story about a sleepover where I learned that some shadows are not just in the mind. It was my freshman year of college, and I was spending the night at my friend Rachel's dorm room. It was one of the older buildings on campus, with long, dark hallways and a faint smell of old dust and cleaning supplies. Rachel's roommate was gone for the weekend, so we had the room to ourselves. We had plans to study, but mostly we were just going to watch movies and eat pizza. It was a cold, rainy Friday night, perfect for staying indoors. The room was small but cozy, filled with our chatter and the sound of the TV. Around midnight, Rachel fell asleep watching a movie. I was still awake, scrolling on my phone. That's when I heard it. A soft, scratching sound coming from the small closet in the corner of the room. It wasn't loud, just a faint scritch, 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 like something tiny was trying to get out. I paused, listening. "Rachel, did you hear that?" I whispered. She just mumbled in her sleep. I told myself it was just the old building, pipes or something. Dorms make weird noises all the time. But the scratching continued, a little more insistent now. It was definitely coming from the closet. My stomach tightened. The air in the room suddenly felt heavy and cold, even though the heating was on. I looked at the closet door. It was closed tightly. The scratching became a little louder, and now I could hear a faint, soft tapping mixed in, like a small finger against the wood. My instincts were screaming that something was wrong. This wasn't pipes. This wasn't the building. This was coming from inside that closet. I slowly sat up, my heart pounding. The scratching and tapping stopped. Then a low, wet sniffle came from the closet. It sounded like someone was crying, very quietly, trying to muffle the sound. Then a small, childlike giggle, thin and cold, echoed from the closet. It was sweet, but utterly chilling. The doorknob to the closet slowly, agonizingly began to turn. It wasn't just a jiggle, it was a deliberate turn, accompanied by a soft click. I stared, paralyzed by fear. The door creaked open, just a sliver, revealing absolute darkness. A low, raspy whisper, like dry leaves, slithered from the crack. "Come, play with me." Then a small pale hand with long, spindly fingers reached out from the darkness, groping for the edge of the door. It wasn't a child's hand. It was too long, too thin, too white. I screamed, a terrified sound that woke Rachel. I scrambled off the bed, stumbling backward, pointing, trembling at the closet. Rachel sat up, confused. "What? What's wrong?" she asked, rubbing her eyes. By then, the closet door was closed again. The room was silent. "It was in the closet," I stammered, my voice shaking. Rachel looked at the closet. "There's nothing there, Chloe. You had a nightmare." She got up, walked to the closet, and opened it fully. It was empty, just hanging clothes and shoes. But I knew what I saw. I never spent another night in that dorm room. Even now, years later, the sound of a faint scratch or a child's giggle when no child is around makes my blood run cold. I always check under beds and in closets before I go to sleep. And I can never shake the chilling question: what was in that closet? And what would have happened if I had gone to play with it?